Hi, Barely Sapient here. Today I'm going to be reviewing PikaOS. It's a gaming distro based on Debian. And like many other gaming distros, it has a lot to offer. Okay, so installing PikaOS is standard fare. For installing a Linux distro, you have the choice when you boot up from a USB stick to use it as live media where you can try it out, or you can install the distro. I'm going to choose install the distro. I'm going to choose my language. Now I choose United Kingdom because I have a UK keyboard. And well, it doesn't matter which spelling I use, I don't care. And although this is a little different, this is the one thing that's like, I don't think I've seen a user license agreement on a Linux distro before, so that's kind of strange. Maybe I just don't remember one. I have a UK keyboard. And of course, I'm going to choose. Heck, it's just easier to search, isn't it? But anyway, it's pretty simple. It's basically like every other Linux distro I've come across that has a nice GUI installation. You can choose to automatically partition a drive. Here, you're going to want to select a drive to do it with. And then once you come to this, you're going to want to double check your options. So which drive. It'll wipe it clean if you pick the option that it does use the BTRFS file system. And those look like pretty standard options for this operating system. Now, PikaOS is Debian based. So it's going to be similar to Ubuntu if you've used that before, or Linux Mint if you've used that before. If you've never used Linux, well, it's one of the easier type of Linux is to use a Debian based. There's a lot of easy distros that come off of that. So there you have it. So it's a nice, easy install process. I'm not going to do it again because I've already installed it. And I will see you on the other side. On your first boot after installation, you will be greeted with a welcome screen. It's very similar to other distros in that regard. You'll be given some setup steps that might interest you, various things. First and foremost, system updates. The recommended additions is probably the most where the most meat and potatoes are for your first parts of setting up your operating system for gaming. This is where you have all of your gaming utilities and platforms such as Steam and Lutris, and of course Pro Games Launcher, which allows you to play GOG games and Epic games, as well as Amazon games. And you can change the look and feel of whichever desktop environment you installed. In this case, I installed GNOME. There's a troubleshooting thing tab on this welcome screen as well. A couple of links to join the community and a few links to contribute to the PikaOS team. Pretty standard fare. Okay, so the system I tested was my AMD Ryzen 1600AF with 32 gigs of DDR4 memory and an AMD Radeon RX 460, which has 2 gigs of VRAM, and a 512 gigabyte NVMe SSD. All games that I did test ran perfectly fine with using Proton. There was a couple games that wouldn't launch using the Linux port if they had one. which is kind of something I'm running in with a lot of these gaming distros. PikaOS is like that too. And it's not really a problem. It's just something that's, well, curious. There were 4 games that on their first installation did not work with the controller. Just they wouldn't detect the controller for some reason. I eventually reinstalled the games and the controller works in them. And the games were Crisis, Doom, plus Doom 2, which is this game here. And it's working with the controllers now as well. Skyrim Special Edition, in the GOG version, that is, and Forsaken Remastered. That was a weird thing. Skyrim Special Edition, I tried all sorts of things trying to get the controller to work. I installed the Steam version because I have that one too. No problems on the controller there. I went down a couple rabbit holes in which, sometimes having Steam on might interfere with your controller while using Pro Games Launcher. I mean, I'd never had that problem in any distro at all. That ended up not being it. I ended up trying to install, copy some X input DLL files into some of the install directories of these games, and that didn't work either. It's just for whatever reason. Those installations, the first time I installed them, and they were the first 4 games GOG games that I installed in Hero Games Launcher, so I thought it was a huge problem. And so I installed a bunch of other games, and it turns out all the games, they all detected a controller. And the weird thing was, Epic Games in Hero Games Launcher, all the controller games worked there too. So it was a weird bug. Ended up just reinstalling the games. Ended up fixing the problem, so that was an unusual bug, and it was the only issue that I've had with PikaOS. Other than that minor setback, I mean, yeah, gaming on this system has been a blast. And it seems to be every game I've attempted to run runs, so that's great. And the speed has been good too. So there we are. And that's just it. The very first game I installed on Hero Games Launcher was an Epic Game Store game known as Art of Rally. This is this game here. I usually just install this to see if everything's working in Hero Games Launcher on a distro. Yeah, everything was working fine as far as the controller, as far as performance, as far as the game launching, that sort of thing. So I didn't think there was a problem. It was the next 4 games where the controller issue came up. I was like, okay, that's just odd. It was fixed, but strange. Okay, so the first game that showed me problems with controllers was Crisis. And as you can see here, it's like, yeah, it's not even detecting the gamepad at all at this point. And this is the GOG version, and I couldn't figure out why. The next game I tested, which is also a GOG game, was Doom plus Doom 2, and for whatever reason, the controller was also just not detected. The next game I tried was Forsaken Remastered, and I also could not get the controller to work in the first installation attempt on this. And the next GOG game that I tested was Skyrim Special Edition, and for whatever reason, the controller wouldn't work in this either. And maybe you can tell that I'm having to use the mouse to navigate everything here. So that was kind of strange. To confirm that it wasn't a system-wide issue that might be affecting everything that somehow got broken when I installed those games, I installed the Steam version of Skyrim Special Edition, and, well, the controller worked, so that wasn't the problem. To confirm that it wasn't just a problem with Hero Games Launcher after these game installs, I installed Darksiders 2, which is an Epic Game Store game, and the controller worked fine. So it's not a system-wide issue, and it's not a Heroic Games Launcher issue. At this point, I thought, okay, maybe it's a problem just with GOG on my system somehow. I then installed Dishonored, which is another GOG game in my library, and the controller worked fine. So I had locked down that it's not a system-wide issue. It's not a Heroic Games Launcher issue. Something's just wrong with those 4 installs. Kind of strange that all 4 of them got messed up, but they did for somehow. So to test my idea, I uninstalled Crisis. And completely uninstalled it. And that worked. And when I mean completely uninstalled, I installed it. There's the option to uninstall the logs and uninstall the settings as well when you install a game from Heroic Games Launcher. Do all of that. And that's what I did. And lo and behold, when I reinstalled the gamepad was detected. I did the same for Doom plus Doom 2, and that worked fine. The gamepad was detected and working. Working just fine. Uninstalling and reinstalling Forsaken Remastered also worked. And that was kind of cool too. Uninstalling and reinstalling Skyrim Special Edition, the GOG version. Doing the exact same thing, removing absolutely everything and reinstalling it worked as well. So the first game I actually tested in Steam was Grand Theft Auto Enhanced. And despite using the RX 460, which was a budget card all the way back in 2016, performance was surprisingly good. Now, I did have to set it to 720p and minimum, but still, this is a pretty good result. As it averaged 63.9 frames per second, and it had a 1% low of 50.1 frames per second, and a 0.1% low of 50 frames per second. So, yeah, the average is above 60, and it's stable. I mean, this is very, very playable. Now, Borderlands 2 is a game that came out around the time that this video card did, and perhaps a couple of years earlier. It runs perfectly fine, as it averaged 62.1 frames per second, a 1% low of 39.5 frames per second, and a 0.1% low of 33.3 frames per second, and this was at 900p high settings. So a solid performance for this game on this card and PikaOS. So I tested Far Cry Primal, the in-game benchmark, and at 720p Ultra with VSync turned off. And the game ran actually pretty well, at least the in-game benchmark that was at these settings. In fact, the score ended up being 39 frames per second with a minimum of 25 and a max of 56. So not bad, but I'd probably want to lower settings at this resolution. That's still a good showing for PikaOS. Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice was a particularly demanding game when it came out in 2017. And its minimum system requirements are above what this system I tested has, at least as far as the GPU is concerned. It requires, on the AMD side, an R9 280X, which has 3 gigs of VRAM. The RX 460 only has 2, and it is slightly slower, actually quite a bit slower according to Tech Power Up. So I was surprised I was able to get, well, a somewhat playable experience on the RX 460, at least at the beginning of the game. It might change later on. But it did average 35.4 frames per second at a 1% low of 16.5 frames per second and a 0.1% low of 15 frames per second. So I imagine there might be parts of the game that are problematic. But it seemed playable at first. Okay, so this is a save game that's a little bit later in the game, and yeah, it's now, what, 15, 16 frames per second? So while I was surprised that it could sometimes deliver a playable frame rate, it's still a little bit beyond this hardware, and there's not anything PikaOS can do about it. The settings in game were, of course, a 720p resolution and all settings to lower off, and using DirectX 12. I'm still surprised that parts of it were playable at all. This seems to be a thing with gaming distros for Linux these days. Linux ports for games that work on Proton won't work when using the Linux port. Not a problem because the Proton version will work. A version of Proton will get the game to work, but the Linux port doesn't work. And this is exactly what happened in PikaOS as well. All was good though because the game actually performed pretty well in the in-game benchmark in Proton Experimental and Steam, and using DX11 or DirectX 11 version of the game that usually performs better on older hardware anyway, which the RX 460 is. And in those settings at 720p high, no, actually this was 900p high, you got 53 frames per second in the in-game benchmark, so not too bad. Okay, so this is the footage from the 720p benchmark. This was 720p high for Rise of the Tomb Raider. So at 720p high, PikaOS did really well, almost 70 frames per second, so that's 68.95. In game, the Rise of the Tomb Raider did fairly well at 900p. Average of 38.4 frames per second and a 1% low of 29.6 frames per second and a 0.1% low of 28.8 frames per second. So maintaining a pretty good solid 30 frames per second frame rate actually in game. So a bit worse than the in-game benchmark, but still definitely playable. Okay, so I ended up benchmarking Skyrim Special Edition, the Steam version, because I was unsure if I'd ever be able to get the GOG version to work with a controller. Anyway, this was at 900p at high settings, and it averaged 53.6 frames per second. It had a 1% low of 33.7 frames per second and a 0.1% low of 32.28% frames per second. Excuse me. Yeah, that's the thing is that I tried Total Warhammer, the Linux port on that as well, and yeah, every time it just wouldn't launch at all. I got nothing, not even an error report. At least Rise of the Tomb Raider gave me that, right? This would just, yep, just like that. Now, I was able to get it to run in Proton, of course, and I chose DirectX 11, and I chose to test it at ultra settings, except for the texture quality. I set that to medium, and I did the benchmarks for both the campaign and the battle. The campaign benchmark did pretty well. It did not maintain 60, but a game like this, that's like on the campaign map, 60 is definitely not a requirement. You don't have to worry about reaction times, is my point on that. The campaign benchmark with these settings did average 50.9 frames per second. So it's, nice. It works. You might want to lower settings if you do go to 1080p or something like that on the hardware like this using PikaOS, but it's certainly an enjoyable experience. On the Battle benchmark, it actually did quite well at these same settings. As you can see here, it's having no problems staying above 60. And it did average 62.7 frames per second, and it was fairly consistent, except for the very beginning of the benchmark. And yes, it does play Crysis, and actually quite well. This is the game at 900p at the highest settings. I think that's very high in the original Crysis. And it averaged 55.6 frames per second, 1% low of 24.4 frames per second, and a 0.1% low of 15.4 frames per second. Now, I complained all this a bit about, not being able to get the controller to work in 4 games. This was one of them, and I think I should have stuck with a mouse and keyboard with this one. What do you guys think? PikaOS shows great game compatibility and performance. This is hard reset redux, and this is high refresh rate gaming. Mutant League Football gave me no issues and ran perfectly fine. Double Dragon Trilogy also gave me no issues and worked perfectly fine. So did older games like Flat Out, although I did have trouble figuring out the controls on this one. And also another older game, Mortal Kombat 4, gave me no issues whatsoever. Mages of Mistralia gave me no issues. In fact, other than the controller issue not being detected in those 4 games until I reinstalled them, I really didn't run into issues at all running PikaOS. Well, Horizon Zero Dawn wouldn't start, but then again, the RX 460 isn't capable of running that game. So there is that. All in all, I think PikaOS is a solid gaming distro, and it's the first Debian-based gaming distro I've come across. It's definitely excited to see what this team comes up with in the future. Well, hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Like and subscribe if you like the video, and comments are always welcome.